There's a good chance one of the jars in your spice rack right now hides something you'd never knowingly eat. Lead. Salmonella. Even cheap fillers and coloring agents secretly stretched into the powder to add weight. None of it shows up as a smell, a taste, or a warning on the label. The FDA has pulled ordinary ground spice straight off American shelves, tested it, and found dangerous levels of heavy metal that should never be there, plus bacteria contamination serious enough to trigger recalls. Brand after brand, alert after alert. And because spices sit in a cabinet for years, some of it is still in kitchens today, long after the warnings went out. The scariest part? These looked like the safest products in the store. One ingredient, nothing to hide. So today, 8 spice products you'll want to know about, 4 that are actually safer, and the one skill that protects you in any aisle. Let's start with the biggest name in the aisle. Number 8. McCormick. Brand size is not the same as batch safety. If any spice company felt untouchable, it would be this one. McCormick has been on American shelves for over a century. It's the red cap you reach for without thinking. And in July 2021, McCormick voluntarily recalled several seasoning products, including Perfect Pinch Italian seasoning and its culinary Italian seasoning, after routine FDA testing flagged possible salmonella contamination. This is a different threat than the metals we'll get to, a living bacteria, one that can cause serious illness in young children, older adults, and anyone with a weaker immune system. No illnesses were reported here. The company pulled the affected lots, investigated, and the recall was later completed and closed. So this isn't a warning hanging over your kitchen today. It's history. But it teaches the first rule of this entire investigation. A giant brand does not mean a perfect jar. Reputation is built over decades. Contamination happens at the level of a single batch, on a single day, in a single facility. The size of the company on the label can't protect the lot in your hand. And here's the uncomfortable part. McCormick has the money, the labs, and the testing systems to catch a problem, and a problem still slipped far enough to trigger a recall. So the question becomes obvious. If bacteria can reach a jar from the most tested company in the aisle, what's happening further down the supply chain? On the discount shelves, where the testing budgets are smaller and the sourcing is harder to trace. That's where the story turns dark. And where the danger stops being bacteria and becomes something you can't cook out. Number 7. La Fiesta. You cannot see, smell, or taste the danger. In March 2024, the FDA issued a public health alert for 6 ground cinnamon products sold in discount stores. La Fiesta was one of them. The reason wasn't bacteria this time. It wasn't flavor, or mold, or anything you'd ever notice. It was lead. And here's why that's scarier than the salmonella we just talked about. You can kill bacteria with heat, cook the food, and the threat drops. You cannot cook lead out of anything. Once it's in the powder, heat does nothing. It goes straight into the meal. Here's the part people struggle with. Lead has no smell. It has no taste. It doesn't change the color of the powder or the way it shakes out of the jar. You could use a contaminated product every single morning for a year, so how does a metal end up in a plant? Spice like this is bark or root, dried and ground. It can pick up lead from contaminated soil, from polluted water, from the roads and processing sites it passes through. That's the accidental path. But investigators have raised a darker possibility too, and it's the third threat from our intro. More on that in a moment, because it changes everything about how you see the price tag. For now, hold on to this. You can't smell lead. Your senses, the tools you've trusted your whole life to judge food, are useless here. The jar can't tell you. Your nose can't tell you. Only a laboratory can. But knowing contamination happened to a brand still doesn't answer the question that matters to you. Is the specific jar in your cabinet affected? That's the next lesson. Number 6. Supreme Tradition lot numbers matter more than brand names. Supreme Tradition ground cinnamon, sold through discount chains like Dollar Tree and Family Dollar, was also named in that March 2024 alert, and it came with something important attached. A list of specific lot codes and best buy dates, not every Supreme Tradition product ever made, specific batches, specific numbers stamped on the bottom of the jar. This is the detail most people miss, and it changes how you read every recall you ever hear about again. A recall is a targeted action. It names specific products, specific lots, specific dates, the exact batches that were tested and failed. Not the logo, the lot. And that's the trap. A vague memory of, "Wasn't there something about that spice?" tells you nothing. The brand on the front is the same on a clean jar and a flagged one. Only the code on the bottom separates them. You need the lot code. The jar in your pantry might be from a completely clean batch, or it might be the exact lot the FDA flagged. Same label, same logo, totally different story. And that's where the discount shelf becomes its own chapter. Where this changes. Here's where the investigation changes. Until now, we've been reading labels, brands, lot codes, anything printed on the jar. The next problem isn't printed on the jar at all. It may have been added on purpose and hidden on purpose. Because the real question was never, which brand? It's what happened to this spice before anyone put a label on it. And the deeper you follow that trail, the less the front of the jar can tell you. Number 5. Markham rock bottom pricing deserves a second look. And here's the ugly reason why. Markham ground cinnamon, sold through discount grocery, appeared in the FDA's cinnamon findings alongside the others. Price alone doesn't convict a jar, but price is a signal, and this is where that third threat from the intro comes in. The fillers, the coloring agents, there's even a name for it: economically motivated adulteration. Tampering with a food to make more money. Here's how it works with spice. Spice is often sold by weight and judged by its rich, deep color. So somewhere in the chain, a dishonest supplier can mix in a cheap, heavy powder to add weight, or a coloring agent to make a dull, low-grade batch look premium. The FDA has been investigating whether some of the lead in this whole cinnamon situation got there exactly this way, through a bright compound that adds both weight and color, and happens to contain lead. Sit with that. It means the contamination might not be an accident of bad soil at all. It could be someone turning poison into profit, because a heavier, redder jar sells for more. That's why the FDA didn't wait for people to get sick. It ran targeted sampling, deliberately pulling spice off discount shelves to test it, hunting in the corner of the market where this is most likely to hide. And it found problems. So extremely cheap spice shouldn't trigger automatic fear, but it should trigger curiosity, a reason to look closer, not to relax. But price isn't even the deepest problem. Traceability is. And to see that, you have to follow the spice across a border. Number 4. Spice class. The danger is repetition, not a single sprinkle. In July 2024, the FDA added more products to its cinnamon alert, including spice class ground cinnamon, after testing found elevated lead. And this one exposes a comforting lie people tell themselves. It's just a pinch. How much harm can a little spice do? Here's the answer. Picture the jar in the cabinet. Monday morning, a spoonful in the oatmeal. Tuesday, the same. Wednesday, the same. Into the coffee, onto the toast, in the baking, in the smoothie. The same jar, opened again and again, for months. Sometimes a year or more. The concern with lead is cumulative exposure. Small amounts, taken in over and over, building quietly in the background. It's not the single teaspoon. It's the same teaspoon, every morning, from the same jar, with no warning sign along the way, used 100 times. And once that jar crosses an international border before it reaches you, the trail behind it gets even harder to follow. The health section, why it matters. Here's why the FDA treated this so seriously. Lead is not a nutrient. The body has no use for it. And health experts describe no known safe level of lead exposure. Meaning the goal isn't a little is fine, it's as close to zero as possible. The people most vulnerable are the ones spices quietly reach the most: young children and pregnant women. In children, ongoing lead exposure has been linked to effects on development, learning, and behavior. And the Salmonella threat from earlier hits the same vulnerable groups: the very young, the older, the immune-compromised, just faster and louder. Here's the cruel part about the metals, though. There's often no dramatic symptom in the moment, no reaction that morning to point at. The FDA specifically noted that people may not show obvious immediate signs, which is exactly why testing, not sensation, is the only real defense. So picture the sequence one more time: jar, teaspoon, Oatmeal. The next morning, another teaspoon. Months of it. No taste, no smell, no warning. That's the entire reason a one-ingredient product earned a federal alert. Number 3. ALB flavor. The lesson. Every border adds a step you can't see. ALB flavor ground cinnamon was another product added to the FDA's lead alert in 2024, tied to imported supply. And imported spice is where traceability either holds or falls apart completely. Think about how many hands a spice can pass through. A farm, a local collector who buys from many farms, a drying site, a grinding facility, an exporter, a shipping broker, an importer, a repackager, a distributor, a store. Now ask the honest question, how many of those steps can the company on the jar actually see? How many can it prove? At each handoff, the spice can be blended with other batches, from other farms, in other conditions. And that's also exactly where someone could quietly add the filler or coloring we talked about. By the time it's in a jar with a clean American label, the original trail can be almost impossible to reconstruct. The world's best spices are imported. That's not the issue. The issue is proof. Value the companies that can actually answer for the journey, step by step, and be wary of the ones whose trail goes dark. The strength of a spice brand isn't the picture on the front. It's whether it can trace the ingredient back through every one of those steps, or whether nobody can say it all. Which leads to the strangest problem of all. A problem hiding inside that short, honest-looking ingredient list. Number 2. Super brand. The lesson: a one-word ingredient list can't reveal a contaminant. In November 2024, the FDA flagged super brand cinnamon for elevated lead. And this is where this documentary has to break a rule. A rule you may have learned from every food video before this one. The old lesson was simple and good. Read the back of the package. Turn it over. Read the ingredients. Know what you're eating. For a frozen pizza, that works. The danger is in the list, the additives, the fillers, the things put there on purpose. But super brand cinnamon had one ingredient. Cinnamon, a perfect, clean, honest label. And it still carried lead. Because an ingredient list only tells you what was added intentionally and legally. It cannot tell you what came along for the ride, a metal from the soil, a bacteria from the facility, or a filler someone slipped in upstream. None of that is a listed ingredient. Nobody prints it. It's not supposed to be there, which is exactly why the label stays silent about it. One ingredient. One enormous blind spot. So reading the back turns out to be only step 1. For spices, the label is where the investigation starts, not where it ends. But if the numbers so far have been unsettling, the single worst result the FDA found was still coming, and it wasn't close. Number 1. El Servidor. This is how bad it can actually get. Every product so far tested somewhere in the range of about 2 to 7 parts per million of lead. Alarming, but in the same neighborhood. Then the FDA tested El Servidor ground cinnamon, sold through a local supermarket. The result? Roughly 20 parts per million of lead, several times higher than anything else on this list. The single worst reading in the entire investigation. And to understand why that number is so chilling, you have to know where this whole thing began. It didn't start in the spice aisle. It started with cinnamon-flavored applesauce pouches that poisoned hundreds of children with lead, some with extraordinarily high levels in their blood. When investigators traced it back, the source was the cinnamon itself. That's what made the FDA start pulling ground spice off shelves and testing it, batch by batch, brand after brand, straight through 2024 and into 2025. El Servidor is what that hunt turned up at its worst. Not a trace, not a borderline number. A jar of one-ingredient spice carrying a heavy metal load high enough that the agency told people to stop using it immediately and throw it away. Sit with what that means. Same clean label as everything else. Same reddish-brown powder, same innocent shake into a bowl of oatmeal, and far more lead than the other flagged products, with nothing you could see, smell, or taste to warn you. That's the real lesson of number 1. The problem was never one rogue company. It was an entire category where a common pantry spice could carry an invisible metal all the way to a child's breakfast, and where the gap between a little contaminated and dangerously contaminated is completely invisible from the outside. So the real question isn't, which brand do I fear? It's how do I shop when the label alone can't protect me? And that's where the better choices come in. Not because their jars look nicer, but because of what they can prove. The 4 that are actually safer. These 4 earned it not with clean labels. Every bad brand had one of those, but with proof. Counting down from 4. Number 4, Louisa Organic. Half the danger in this whole story came from scale and shadow. Huge catalogs, blended batches, trails that go dark. Louisa is almost the opposite kind of company. It's small, organic, and built around a short, focused line of products rather than a warehouse of them. And that focus showed up in the numbers. When Consumer Reports ran its independent lead testing, Louisa's organic cinnamon landed in the lowest risk group, the cleanest tier of everything tested. A narrow catalog is a feature here, not a weakness. Fewer products, fewer suppliers, fewer places for a bad batch to hide. When there's less to watch, it's easier to watch all of it. Number 3, McCormick Yes. The same McCormick from number 8. That's not a contradiction. It's the whole point. The 2021 recall involved specific lots, and it's closed. Today's judgment comes from today's evidence. It's cinnamon, tested independently, rated acceptable to use, and it runs large-scale sourcing and quality systems that can trace a product and pull a bad batch fast when something slips. A clean label doesn't make a brand safe, and a closed recall doesn't make it dangerous. What decides it is current testing, current traceability, current controls. Judge the systems, not the reputation. And by that standard, McCormick lands in the safer column. Number 2, Simply Organic, a Frontier Co-op brand. Simply Organic, part of Frontier Co-op, does the thing opaque brands won't. It talks openly about how its products are handled. The company points to third-party food safety standards, and industry heavy metal limits its spices are held against, and it discloses organic sourcing rather than hiding behind vague, imported language. It also offers Ceylon cinnamon, a specific named type, so you know exactly what you're buying. In independent testing, it's cinnamon rated acceptable to use, but the real reason it climbs this high is transparency. When a company will tell you where a spice came from and how it's checked, you're no longer flying blind, and adulteration has far fewer places to hide. Number 1, Morton & Bassett San Francisco Organic. When Consumer Reports ran its own independent lead testing on cinnamon in 2024, most products landed somewhere on the spectrum. A small handful stood out at the very bottom, the lowest risk group of all. Morton & Bassett's organic ground cinnamon was one of them. That's why it takes the top spot. It's not a slogan on the front of a jar. It's a measurement. Independent testing put actual numbers on it and found it among the cleanest of the entire batch. The opposite end of the scale from a jar like El Servidor. That's the difference between trust us and here's the result. Notice what all 4 share. Not perfect labels, proof, testing you can point to, sourcing they'll disclose, and traceability that holds when you follow the trail back. How to protect yourself. So how do you do this yourself, in the aisle, without a chemistry lab? It comes down to a few fast checks. Start with origin. Does the label actually name where the spice came from? A real country beats a vague, global sources. Then recalls, has this exact product and lot been named in an active FDA alert? The lot code matters, not just the brand. Look for testing. Does the company say anything real about how it checks for contaminants and bacteria? Silence isn't proof of a problem, but transparency is a signal. Favor whole spices you grind yourself when you can, since it's harder to hide a filler in a stick than a powder. Treat a shockingly cheap jar as a reason to look closer, not relax. And check the old jars already in your cabinet. Spices outlast their warnings. Origin, recall, testing, form, price, storage. Every time. Back to the spice rack. Same jars, same one-word labels. The same cinnamon you'd have shaken into your oatmeal this morning without a second thought. At the start, you thought the same thing most people do. One ingredient means one thing to check. Now you know better. There's the ingredient list, there's the origin, there's the lot code. There's the testing, there's the recall history. A single word on the front and a whole story behind it. A metal, a bacteria, a hidden filler that the word will never tell you. That's the shift. With a frozen pizza, the truth is on the back of the package. You just have to read it. With spices, the back of the package is only where you begin, because the real answer isn't printed there at all. With most foods, the truth is on the back of the package. With spices, sometimes you have to follow the ingredient all the way back to where it came from.